Hello, it's your Uncle Spurt here, and for this past week I've had my SIM secreted inside of the fresh new IQOO Neo 10. It's a mid-range blower that can beat most flagships in a few key areas, but especially the battery life, thanks to the hilariously huge 7000 mAh cell. That's almost twice as much battery action as the Galaxy S25 Edge. So here's my IQOO Neo 10 review, and for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! So let's start with the design, and the IQOO Neo 10 looks rather smart if not particularly remarkable. It's a 6.78-inch blower. As you can see, they're reasonably skinny bezels, although not entirely symmetrical, slightly chunkier down here, good bit of chin action. And not a light lad either, at 206 grams, which I'm guessing is mostly down to the friggin' enormous battery stuffed inside. Although thankfully, as you can see there, not too chunky, the camera bump isn't ridiculous. And that weight certainly can't be attributed to premium materials because this thing is mostly plastic. You've got a plastic frame and a placky composite back end. So that's certainly one area where they've managed to save a bit of cash. You've got quite flat iPhone style edges, but slight curvature, slight tapering of that back end. So the IQOO Neo 10 isn't uncomfortable to clutch despite being the size of an elephant's happy sack. And this wee chap comes in a couple of different colours, and as a Sunderland FC fan I absolutely would have gone for that red and white model if I'd had the choice. Instead I got this here gold model, which doesn't look particularly gold unless the light is sort of striking it just so. This is maybe a bit more coppery, or like a cup of tea that's gone wrong. But not the most thrilling of designs. That camera bump just looks like it's kind of just been slapped on there, no fanfare or anything. You've got a shield glass screen up front, plus a pre-installed screen protector, so reasonably hardy, although the IQOO Neo 10 is on the IP65 splash resistant. So a wee bit damp is fine, but if you spurt all over this thing, you might be in trouble. Now, because IQOO is a sub-brand of Vivo, that means of course that the launcher of choice is a bit of FunTouch OS version 15. There's a sneak peek at the rest of the specs for anyone who can't be bothered to wait to hear me bang on about it. And apparently the Neo 10 comes with the promise of 3 guaranteed Android OS upgrades and 4 years of security patching. So not bad, not total trouser. And if you don't know about FunTouch OS, well, it's perfectly okay. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, beyond the excellent name, obviously. It's a mostly stock Android sort of vibe. You've got your notification center and control center all combined in one, as usual. The settings menu mostly makes sense. Everything is kind of where you'd expect to find it. And you've got a few bonus bits chucked in there, like Jovi, which is a bit pants. And you've got the Ultra Game mode, which is pretty decent as well. Plenty of features packed in there, including brightness locks, reject calls and notifications. You've got the esports mode, if you're proper hardcore, and of course the performance panel, so you can swap between battery saver all the way up to monster mode. But more on all that gaming shenanigans in a wee bit. Unfortunately, I've seen a wee bit of shonkiness from the IQOO Neo 10 this past week. Not too much, to be fair, for a fresh new blower. Just little things like occasionally I'll go into a messaging app and I'll go to type a message and the virtual keyboard won't actually appear on screen, making it somewhat tricky. And on a couple of occasions, the Bluetooth streaming has been a wee bit juddery as well, which I'll mention now because I'll probably have forgotten it by the time we get to the audio bit. And while the Neo 10 comes with a base 128 gigs of storage, thankfully my review model has 512 gigs of the stuff banged in there. So certainly can't have a grump on about that, although not expandable via microSD. I've just dropped my bloody SIM card. Don't mind me, just scrabbling about on the floor like an old man who's dropped his glasses. Where's the bloody thing? Now, I rather liked the 6.78-inch AMOLED display slapped on the front end of the IQOO Neo 10 as well. It's a 1.5K resolution display, 2800 by 1260 pixel resolution, so reasonably crisp images despite the fact it's a proper big old beefy display. Got all the usual color modes, so you can make things really bright and vivid or calm it down a bit. There's also an adaptive color setting if you want it to automatically adjust based on the ambient light. Speaking of which, the screen is pretty bright. Generally had no issues seeing what was going on outdoors, unless it was proper full-on sunshine, in which case I did have to squint and wiggle it about the place a bit to see what was happening on the screen. And also this panel maxes out at 144Hz refresh rate for supported apps, although it's not LTPO tech, so it only drops as low as 60Hz. You got all the usual blue light filtering shenanigans stuffed on here, as well as low flicker certification, so if you are quite sensitive to the flicker on OLED displays, touch wood, should be fine, although they didn't give a specific figure for the PWM dimming. And the iQOO Neo 10 sports a pair of stereo speakers naturally, and while some smartphones have an audio booster mode, which somewhat hilariously claims to jack that sound up to 200% volume, well, the Neo 10 actually goes one step further. Not only can it hit 200%, it can go all the way up to 300%, baby. And fair play, those speakers are proper bloody loud on 300% level. I mean, I'm half deaf and even I was recoiling a bit listening to action scenes and shooty bits in movies. But the audio quality is also a wee bit flat. Certainly when you max it out, there's not as much bass as you might hope for, so I still preferred using earbuds or headphones or whatnot. And as I briefly banged on about before, the Bluetooth streaming's generally been fine this past week. There's just one or two moments where there's just a slight judder when I've been listening to an audiobook or some music or whatever for no foreseeable reason. As for the performance, well, that comes courtesy of Qualcomm's freshly launched Snapdragon 8S Gen 4, a more affordable alternative to the Snapdragon 8 Elite, boasting a similar 8-core setup and the Adreno 825 GPU, which is admittedly a downgrade from the 830 of the Elite. And according to the iQOO Neo 10 specs, that's backed by up to 16 gigs of RAM, but I got 12 gigs of the stuff crammed into my review model. And you've also got Vivo's Q1 chips slipped in there alongside the 8S Gen 4 just to assist for certain gaming features. And speaking of gaming, well, I tested this bad boy out with one of the most intensive Android titles, Wuthering Waves, which played with a mostly smooth and consistent frame rate when the visual settings were kicked right up. Occasionally the FPS level did drop a notch, but I didn't notice any judders or pauses even when gaming for around an hour or so. Now apparently you've got quite a sizable vapor chamber crammed in here alongside that flippin' huge battery, and it's probably just as well because after just a few minutes of gaming on Wuthering Waves it was already starting to get pretty warm. And the other day when I was driving for around sort of 2 to 3 hours using Android Auto, this thing got so toasty that it actually started to tell me off for trying to open up more apps alongside Google Maps. So I do worry that while the Snapdragon 8S Gen 4 seems reasonably beefy, it also seems to be running quite hot. But hey, then we come to the undoubted highlight of the iQOO Neo 10, which is the ridiculously massive battery they've somehow managed to stuff inside of here. 7,000 mAh capacity, which is only marginally beaten by the Red Magic 10 Pro, which I recently reviewed, but still one of the biggest capacity batteries of any smartphone I've ever tested. At least as far as I can remember, unless pounding back endless aftershocks has completely ruined my head. So unsurprisingly, the battery life here is rather special, with mixed app use, so a fair bit of messaging and web browsing, the occasional bit of audio and video streaming, and roughly 6 to 7 hours of screen on time per day. You'll comfortably get 2 full days of use out of a single charge. And if you do all of that, plus say introduce a couple of hours of Android Auto action or a bit of video chatting or something more intensive like that, well, you'll probably still end a very busy, intensive day with around 30 to 40% battery life left in the tank. If you want to actually get this thing into battery saver mode by the end of a single day, it's going to take some serious Wuthering Waves action or something. So if you are a power user whose smartphone is permanently glued to their hand, you should be more than satisfied here. And the good news is, even though that battery is an absolute whopper, you've also got 120 watt wired fast charging here. So if you actually somehow manage to almost fully drain the Neo 10, you'll be able to get it fully juiced up again in just over half an hour. Although sadly no bugger all wireless charging support here, so it is cables all the way. Which brings us rather nicely onto the final part of this delightful iQOO Neo 10 review, the camera tech. And I gotta say, if you do spend a lot of time on your smartphone's camera and that is a priority for you, you might want to look elsewhere. It's a fairly basic setup here on the iQOO Neo 10. You've got a 50 meg IMX882 sensor for that primary shooter. And I gotta say, I did notice some significant saturation at times when shooting against a bright background, or sometimes just randomly. and I did have to manually boost the brightness in murkier conditions. The default shooting mode is vivid, but if you don't want those bright poppy colours, you can swap to the textured or natural modes instead. It's a different vibe. And portrait shots here on the Neo are very much hit and miss as well. Sometimes they look pretty decent, but that bokeh effect can be a wee bit mad, seemingly just blurring whatever it feels like. While I also got some horribly saturated pics spaffed out once again. And there's no zoom lens slapped on here, and you can only digitally zoom up to the 10 times level, but frankly everything looks a bit fuzzy and crap after you pass the 3 times-ish level, so I just leave it there. And yes, apologies for these slightly disturbing pics of what is actually a functioning children's ride in Folkestone, not something straight out of Silent Bloody Hill. Your alternative snapper here on the IQOO Neo 10 is an 8 megapixel ultra-wide angle shooter using a Galaxy Core sensor. And I'm not gonna lie, my expectation levels were about shin high for this one. But it's actually not too bad, as long as you don't try using it in crap light or anything. And you've got the usual variety of bonus camera modes, bit of night action, portrait, etc. You've also got a dedicated Pro mode, which can shoot in RAW format if you fancy it. And for your video style shenanigans, you can capture 4K resolution footage at 30 or 60 frames per second with both the rear and the front cameras. And I found the quality was fine in my test footage, pretty decent stabilization and clear audio pickup, as long as it's not all kicking off and stupidly noisy all around you. Although I did once again see some serious saturation creeping in if the light was in a slightly awkward place. And that 32 megapixel selfie shooter suffers from similar issues to the rear cam, but it's there just for your simple selfie shots. Again, you can shoot 4K resolution footage at 30 or 60 frames per second with okay-ish stabilization and not terrible audio pickup. And there you have it, my lovelies. That in a tasty wee nutshell is the fresh new IQOO Neo 10. And certainly if your priorities are stellar battery life and smooth performance on a sort of more mid-range-ish budget, well, it's well worth considering. The major weakness here is certainly the camera tech, which is pretty basic stuff, unfortunately beaten by some cheaper rivals. Not the most heart-pounding or crotch-throbbing of designs either, but hey-ho. Anyway, that's what this bald, haggard, knackered old northern tosspot reckons, but what do you think of the Neo 10? It'd be great to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest greatest tech, and have yourselves a ruddy wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you!